The time for playing games is over, and the IDF is deployed and ready to carry out an attack on Hamas in Gaza if the order is given by the political echelon. Various scenarios are being prepared with all elements in play, including the ground forces, Air Force, and also the Navy, as the IDF reports an exceptionally large scope of preparedness. Hamas has made a gamble that they could change the terms of the ceasefire deal and Israel would not push back. But that gamble appears to have been a mistake. Now, they have good reasons to keep the remaining hostages alive in order to continue using them as a tool to erode Israeli will to continue fighting and cause division within the civil society. Meanwhile, for the record, the numbers prove that Israel had been complying with the ceasefire agreement. And contrary to Hamas's claim that Israel brought 8,500 aid trucks into the Strip, in practice, more than 14,000 had entered. Hamas claimed that no caravans are entering the Strip, yet that part of the plan is still under Egypt's responsibility and not Israel. And speaking of Egypt, Cairo is furious and insists that the residents of the Gaza Strip not be deployed or transferred anywhere. Egypt's President El-Sisi has indefinitely postponed his planned trip to Washington to meet with President Trump, while massive Egyptian military forces have been deployed to the Sinai Peninsula next to Israel. And amidst all of this, Egypt has announced that it will present its own version for the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip soon. President Trump emerged from his meeting on Tuesday with Jordanian King Abdullah saying that Jordan and Egypt have land that could be used to take in Gazan residents, while Abdullah insisted that the interests of everyone must be taken into account. TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will take us through the impact of Trump's statements and show us what's happening on the ground and what's behind Trump's plan. Meanwhile, in the northern arena, the United States has rejected Israel's request to extend the IDF's deployment in Lebanon and insists on withdrawal by February 18th. At the same time, the IDF is formulating a new response policy vis-à-vis Hezbollah, and the Lebanese army has begun its deployment in that area. However, ahead of the IDF's withdrawal, Iranian officials have visited Beirut to demonstrate their support for Hezbollah and help them reorganize. Last but not least, the Houthi terror organization in Yemen has declared that if fighting resumes in Gaza, they will resume firing ballistic missiles at Israel and attacking ships in the Red Sea. We have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what is happening in Israel on day 495 of the war with Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, and the Shia militias in Iraq. All of them are acting under the control of Iran, the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. A moment before we start, I want to invite you to hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel if you want to receive daily Boots on the Ground episodes from Israel. This video is brought to you by Magen David Adom, Israel's emergency medical team that relies entirely on donations. I'll tell you more about them in a moment. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced on Tuesday evening that if Hamas does not release all the remaining hostages by noon on Saturday, the Gaza ceasefire will end and the IDF will resume fighting Hamas until it is defeated. On Wednesday morning, following the ultimatum, Hamas issued a statement accusing Israel of endangering the agreement. The Israeli announcement came after Netanyahu met with several senior ministers, including the ministers of defense, foreign affairs, and national security, who he said gave their full support to the ultimatum. In the IDF, they are preparing for various scenarios and have announced an especially large scope of preparedness. And following the cabinet's decision, the IDF began building up forces in the Gaza border. Currently, in the area around Gaza, there are two divisions deployed in a defensive layout: the 162nd Regular Armored Division and the 143rd Gaza Division. The IDF confirms that even before the cabinet's decision on Tuesday evening, Many regular forces were already called up last night to reinforce the area and prepare in case they were needed. Alongside regular battalions that were shifted south, special units have been mobilized that will operate under the divisions. As mentioned, in recent hours, the Southern Command is approving operational plans and battle procedures for the continuation of activity if necessary. All leaves have been cancelled for combat troops until further notice, and the IDF statement said that additional forces, including divisions, both regular and reserve, are in stages of preparation and will be employed according to the developments. The IDF has concentrated a large number of tanks in the area of the Gaza Strip and has deployed in Gaza the two combat engineering battalions, Battalion 601 and Battalion 605. The IDF says that for now, forces are set up in a defensive position, but the scope of forces that the IDF is now concentrating around Gaza is such that they could immediately carry out an offensive operation if needed. At the same time, humanitarian assistance is continuing as Hamas claims that Israel is bringing 8,500 aid trucks into the Gaza Strip, but in reality, more than 14,000 are entering. Israel is also bringing more than 300,000 tents into the Gaza Strip. This is in accordance with the ceasefire agreement. In addition, under the agreement, Israel is allowing up to 50 trucks of fuel and gas per day to enter the Gaza Strip. Hamas's claim that caravans are not entering the Strip is true, but that is something that Egypt had committed to and not Israel. At the moment, Egypt is preoccupied with carrying out military maneuvers with tanks near the border with Israel. So to summarize, Hamas took a big gamble this week when it announced the postponement of the hostages' release, and it seems that the terror organization did not take seriously the United States President Donald Trump's statements about evacuating Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. On the contrary, in Gaza, they saw the opposition of Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan to the American plans as an opportune moment. From their perspective, it was a chance to extort additional equipment and supplies from Israel. Moreover, the entire Arab pressure raised hopes of pushing forward their main demands, ending the war and complete IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. These two conditions would allow them to rebuild their terror army and get ready for another round of fighting against the Jewish state. To apply maximum pressure on Israel, Hamas issued a significant message on Monday evening, about 2 hours before the news broadcasts. The military wing spokesperson Abu Obeida announced that the release of the hostages is postponed until further notice and until retroactive compensation for ceasefire agreement violations. There might be several reasons that Hamas acted this way at this time. To start, they are worried about the situation in Gaza, as many residents who return to the north of the Strip have no shelters and simply go back to the south where there is more humanitarian aid available. Most infrastructure in the north has been destroyed, and the 2/3 of the houses of this area were completely or partially demolished. Against this backdrop, many Gazans are showing interest in Trump's plan to evacuate them to other countries where they might be able to have a better life. But if that happens, Hamas would lose their human shields as well as a major source of income, so they decided to try and exploit Israel's desire to get the hostages back in order to try and improve their own position. The goal is to extort resources that would allow Gazans to move back into the northern part of the Gaza Strip so they can serve as human shields for Hamas. Hamas is demanding that 60,000 caravans or small mobile homes be brought into the area immediately. They also want another 150,000 tents to be brought in as soon as possible. They are also demanding building materials for more permanent structures. However, they did not anticipate that Israel will call their bluff and demand in return that all 9 of the remaining living hostages that were scheduled to be released in Phase A be released immediately. This puts Hamas in a dilemma, because if the agreement is terminated now, it would deny Hamas one of their main goals, to end the war with them still in charge in Gaza and having the IDF fully withdraw. At this point, it's not impossible that Hamas will agree to accelerate Phase A of the hostage deal in return for the release of hundreds of terrorists under the agreement and a renewal of negotiations for Phase B. Even after completing Phase A, it will still hold more than 20 live hostages, which will be used by Hamas to extort Israel with other demands. On the other hand, Hamas fears that Israel has no interest in Phase B at all. From their perspective, it is better to keep as many hostages alive as possible in order to continue tormenting Israel and eroding Israeli society from within. Beyond that, the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who return to the north of the Gaza Strip will make it very hard for the IDF to renew the war. But let it not be claimed otherwise. Hamas is preparing for the ceasefire agreement to be terminated. According to the organization's sources, commanders and senior figures have already been instructed to stop using mobile phones for fear of targeted assassinations. Those instructions, according to publications in Ashrak al-Awsat newspaper, were brought forward from the end of Phase A due to recent developments. In addition, the showy ceremonies of handing over hostages and the mass funerals of Hamas leaders are being used to recruit more and more terrorists to the organization. In the coming days, it will become clear whether Hamas took a calculated risk or made a strategic mistake. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on all the details, and we ask you to join us in praying for the safety of our hostages. A lot is happening on the diplomatic front in the Middle East since President Trump's inauguration, and TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will take us deep into things and explain to us what happened in the series of meetings and decisions by the American administration. So Mati, over to you.
Thank you, Yair. So the saga indeed continues. President Trump, will just remind everyone, just a couple of weeks ago, started flowing this outlandish and very new idea, and the idea is displacing the people of Gaza, moving them into a new place to rebuild the Gaza Strip according to his words, and to bring them a better future. And on the way, while we're doing that, do something incredibly important, which is remove the Hamas terrorist from the government. Now here's where things get interesting. Since that happened, what seemed to be this outlandish idea has become the beginning of a plan. President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu met just last week and talked through the details of it and started giving more depth to this initial concept. And since then, although Egypt and Jordan, which were proclaimed to be the destinations for many of the people of Gaza to move to, although they have strongly resisted this, Trump continued to push. This last week, we saw something incredibly interesting. President Trump is setting up for a meeting with the King of Jordan. He's already declared publicly that he's located, quote unquote, the lands within Jordan that can accommodate the Palestinian people. And at the same time, the president of Egypt has resisted and pushed back on a meeting with Trump while continuing to state that he's not going to budge on his resistance to receive any more refugees from the Gaza Strip. So let's talk about what this means for the region we're in. First of all, we've seen at this point that the plan that seemed like, again, this negotiation sort of positioning scheme is much more than that. It is part of a regional plan to rebuild stability in this region, to remove Hamas in any way means possible from their hold or their chokehold on the people of Gaza, and to bring some kind of agreement and ceasefire that in a long-term sense of more than months will allow the people of Israel and this region to go back to a peaceful way of life. More so, this agreement repositions, or this thought process, I should say, shows that the Trump administration, the incoming Trump administration, has given a huge amount of thought to the question of what will U.S. policy in this region look like. And what does it look like, really? It looks like the U.S. repositioning itself to be the kingmaker and the kingbreaker, by the way, of powers in the Middle East. They're showing everyone that if they flex their muscles big enough, they can make a country that was on the brink of financial catastrophe flourish, and they've floated that idea to several countries in the region. And at the same time, they've shown that countries that are going to resist them, the Iranians, the Egyptians possibly, Hamas, will be crushed in a level of force that is unseen so far. We can see, and I say this with a high level of confidence, that even before Trump entered office, his public statements were enough to reshape the way people in this region behaved. So think about this. Even before President Trump was in office, his public proclamations, his special emissary to the Middle East, were enough to reshape the way people behaved in this region. Hamas included, Hezbollah included, Iranians included in that story. Something to bear in mind is that the perception of power is almost as important as the use of power in the Middle East specifically. If the US government is able to position itself in a way that other countries believe it will use force, even if it doesn't have to use force, that in itself is enough to shift the turn or the chain of events in this region. So what does this likely mean? On a very likely or very high likelihood, Hamas that have been threatening to withdraw from the ceasefire agreement are probably going to continue as is with this agreement. They're trying to show force, they're trying to flex their muscles and show the US and Israel that they're still to a certain degree in control. But in reality, they are likely going to give back the hostages in a couple days, as was initially intended. President Trump made some very, very strong threats against the Hamas people, stating that if they don't release the hostages that are planned according to the ceasefire agreement by noon on Saturday, Israel time, he will unleash a level of violence that they have never seen before. And those statements are not empty statements. The US has the power, has the ability, and we've seen Trump in previous term do exactly that. Bring down fire and weaponry and munitions on the enemies of the US and the enemies of the state of Israel. So is this just an empty threat, or is it a negotiation ploy, or is this something that's really going to happen? I believe it's all the above. President Trump, together with Prime Minister Netanyahu, are making some very bold moves into repositioning American interest in the Middle East and bolstering and strengthening Israel's interest in this very region. The thought here is not just about what's happening tomorrow. The thought is about how are we positioning the power balance? How do we maintain American interest in the Middle East? How do we make sure that the Saudis are incentivized to join back into substantial negotiations and a place of influence alongside the US in this region? And how do we make sure that Israel doesn't continue to fight endlessly in a war that's been going on for over 15 months? So I think everyone's asking themselves the question of, will Jordan and Egypt budge? And the answer is yes and no, as it often is in the Middle East. They're not going to agree to everything that President Trump asked for. Neither of them is going to accept 1.8 million refugees from any country whatsoever, regardless of what the payoff is, simply because they can't afford to do so politically. For the King of Jordan, within his own royal family and within his own government, capitulating to those requests by the Trump administration would be an admission of weakness that he will be very hard-pressed to recover from. For the president of Egypt, the same applies. Receiving any substantial number of refugees would weaken his government and show that he's not as strong as previously assumed. But there's a whole lot between nothing and receiving 1.8 million Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. And in that middle, in that huge gray area, there's receiving hundreds of thousands, there's allowing pass-through and maybe third countries receiving some of these refugees, there's providing some kind of sanctuary zones for the Palestinian refugees from the Gaza Strip. There's a whole line of possible options that could take place. So do I believe that 1.8 million Gazans are going to move into Jordan or Egypt anytime soon? No, but the number's also not going to be zero. And I think that's the important takeaway from everything we're talking about, is the fact that it's much more complex and the gray area highly outweighs the black and white thought process of yes or no. And what we can expect to see is a shift that will hopefully, prayerfully, and the best outcome for the Palestinians of Gaza is remove Hamas from power, rebuild the Gaza Strip, and allow a better life for the people desperately needing hope within the Gaza Strip. And of course, safety for the long term for the people of Israel.
Thank you so much, Mati Shoshani, for making sense of these things. And once again, I will ask you to keep spreading the truth by sharing our videos on YouTube and following us on social media. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And in between videos, you can go to our news website that brings you what is happening in Israel in real time. So go to www.tbnisrael.com to stay tuned to the truth and get in-depth articles and ongoing updates on what's happening in Israel. Now, I want to take another minute and tell you about Magen David Adom, Israel's emergency medical team that relies entirely on donations. For the last 15 months, Magen David Adom has been working hard to help those hurt by rocket attacks, terrorism, and everyday emergencies. They provide first aid to all people regardless of their faith: Jews, Muslims, Christians, and anyone else in need. Whether it's treating injuries or helping a woman give birth, these volunteers are always ready to help. But the work never stops. They need donations to keep going. Medical supplies are used up quickly, and training for future emergencies is constant. So if you want to help their effort, please donate at www.savelifeisrael.com. Your support saves lives. Israel needs Magen David Adom, and they need you. As Mati Shoshani reported, it seems that Egypt does not agree with Trump's plan for Gaza. A source familiar with the details told the Saudi newspaper Ashraq al-Awsat on Wednesday morning that negotiations are taking place between Egypt and other Arab states regarding the administration of the Gaza Strip. According to the source, these arrangements include the return of the Palestinian Authority to govern the Strip without Hamas opposition. Additionally, El Arabiya and El Hadet reported that Egypt has two plans for the reconstruction of Gaza that do not include population displacement, as Egypt is not ready to allocate land from its territory for Gaza residents and has recently sent several responses to President Trump's plan. So according to them, Egypt projected 3 proposals concerning Gaza that included the displacement of the population without a right of return into the Gaza Strip in the future. With that in mind, on Tuesday, amidst the ultimatum set in response to Hamas's threats to delay the upcoming hostage release phase, United States President Donald Trump met with King Abdullah II of Jordan. In the context of this meeting, he declared that "I don't think that Hamas will meet the deadline that I set for Saturday. They're acting tough. Let's see how tough they really are." He added, "I've learned in life that the bully is always the weakest person and Hamas is the bully. If Hamas does not release the hostages by Saturday at 12, then the gloves come off." It is also important to point out that a large Egyptian military presence has recently been moved to the border with Israel, violating the 1979 Camp David Accords peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. This raises a question about what Egypt is trying to signal. Are they preparing for war with Israel? Only time will tell. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on these issues, and we ask you to help us share the truth. Share our videos on YouTube and follow us on social media. And most importantly, click on that subscribe button if you haven't already. Now shifting the focus to the northern arena. In Lebanon, the IDF is still dismantling Hezbollah infrastructure and weapons in the days leading to the scheduled withdrawal of our troops from that territory. A spokesperson of the United States National Security Council declared on Tuesday that Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon is still scheduled to proceed according to the current timetable. According to him, Israel has not requested any further extension beyond February 18, which was set after the original January 28 deadline was postponed. This statement follows report in Israeli media that Israel requested an additional extension until March 1st, a date set for Israel's residents to return to their homes in the northern communities of the Jewish state. However, Israel's Channel 12 news portal reported that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu requested a delay of several weeks from the United States president, presenting evidence to support his claim that the Lebanese army is not adequately supervising Hezbollah's activities. Meanwhile, the Jerusalem Post reported that this week the United States authorities have made it clear to Israel that the withdrawal must be completed by February 18th with no possibility of further extensions. According to the IDF radio, Israel is attempting to persuade the United States to approve changes in the border region with Lebanon, but there are doubts about the American administration's willingness to accommodate these requests. Meanwhile, the Northern Command is formulating a new response policy to potential Hezbollah violations before the withdrawal is completed. And according to IDF officials, Israel intends to forcibly prevent activities such as patrols by armed Hezbollah members along the border, even if they are accompanied by the Lebanese army or UNIFIL forces. The IDF expects the first challenge to be protest demonstrations in the border area, which will be treated as a security threat. The United States Special Envoy to Lebanon, Morgan Arturgus, has been briefed on Israel's new security arrangement for the border area, centered around keeping strategic control points in the hands of the elite IDF units. According to the IDF, they are currently finalizing a full reorganization of the area, including extensive sweeps to clear out the remaining terrorist infrastructure. Ahead of the withdrawal, the IDF will complete its security preparations and be ready for an immediate withdrawal, including a scenario where the ceasefire agreement is extended. However, according to intelligence assessments, there is no immediate invasion threat to the Galilee communities of Israel. Hezbollah remains the ability to launch anti-tank missiles, fire single rockets or dozens of short-range rockets towards central Israel, but they are not capable of executing a large-scale combined assault. On the ground, the Lebanese army is preparing to expand its deployment to areas vacated by the IDF. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on these developments, especially if Hezbollah attempts to continue firing into Israel in support of Hamas in case the fighting in the Gaza Strip resumes. You can stay tuned to The Truth, share, and follow us. And once again, click on that subscribe button if you haven't already. And now, we return to TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani, who will analyze the renewed threat of the Houthis and their willingness to fight Israel in the event of resumed hostilities with Hamas in the Gaza Strip.
Thank you, Yair. Something interesting that's also happening is that we thought we were done with proxy warfare, and it turns out we're not. The Houthis are still alive and kicking, albeit in flip-flops, which is a joke we love to make. But they've been back at making threats, publicly stating that they will go back to launching munitions against Israel, that they are still in the game. Now let's remind everyone why this is important. The MO, the modus operandi of the Iranians in this entire region has and probably will be for the foreseeable future using proxies to fight their wars. And the Houthis are no exception to that rule. The exception is that they're sometimes more extreme than the Iranian overlords. They themselves have an Islamic jihadist agenda. They're not doing this only for the sake of money. They really deeply hate the West, hate Israel, hate America. In fact, it's so clear that it's on their very flag. So what does this mean? The Houthis are still in the game. They still have ballistic missiles. They still have the ability to carry out piracy attacks within the Arabian or the Red Sea, depending where they want to go with that. They still are the allies and the proxies of the Iranians in this region. So when they say we're going back to destabilizing, when they say we're going back to firing rockets at Israel or US allies in the region, when they say we're going to destabilize the oil trade in this region, what they're actually saying is Iran is still flexing its muscle, trying to bring a fear into the hearts of people in this region, and yet also reposition itself towards the upcoming negotiations with the United States. Because for the Iranians and their Houthi proxies, this is the make or break time. This is the time where we're going to find out whether they're going to capitulate to American request or they're coming back to the table and waiting to see what they can get out of the Americans with removing sanctions and the future of their nuclear program. And of course, over all of this is the agenda and the question of how powerful is Iran and its proxies in this region? How much are they able to project power? And how hard will the American administration under President Trump push at them? And now back to Yair Pinto.
We will continue to update you with our boots on the ground here in Israel. And we ask you to please join us in prayer, as this is a spiritual war that involves all of us. I know that it's complicated, and I don't have the answers myself. I doubt that anyone knows the right way forward. But personally, when I'm challenged with a situation that I cannot handle myself on my own, I pray and I ask God to take control. And you know what? He always finds a way, because he's always faithful to the people of Israel and to all of you. So here are a few prayer points for the situation now in Israel. First of all, pray for wisdom for our leaders and the leaders of this world to make godly decisions. Second, pray for the hostages to be released from the Gaza Strip. And as always, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, this city right behind me. And together, we will win this war because God is on our side.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.